When you're a kid, the world feels big in a different way. Not because of how far you can see, but because of how much you don't understand yet. You don't know which shadows matter. You don't know which sounds you should pay attention to. And you don't know the difference between something harmless and something dangerous. Back then, danger felt like a thing adults talked about, not something that could walk behind you on an early school morning. This happened when I was 10 years old. I lived on a quiet street where the bus stop sat at the corner, right under a flickering streetlight. Most mornings were cold, dark, and uneventful. Just me, my backpack, and the sound of distant cars on the highway. But one morning stood out, not because of anything huge at first, but because of something small, something subtle, something I didn't understand until later. I walked out of the house and felt the cold air hit my face. The sun wasn't up yet. Frost covered the grass. Everything felt still and half asleep. I zipped my jacket, adjusted my backpack straps, and started walking toward the bus stop. Halfway down the block, I heard footsteps behind me. Light, slow, steady. Not close enough to alarm me, but close enough for me to notice. I assumed it was another kid from the neighborhood. Someone late, someone heading to the same bus stop. I didn't look back. I just kept walking. But the footsteps adjusted to my pace. When I walked faster, they walked faster. When I slowed down, they slowed down. At 10 years old, I didn't understand what that meant. I just felt something strange in my stomach, like my body understood before my mind did. When I reached the corner, I glanced back casually, expecting a classmate. Instead, I saw a man, tall, standing partly behind a telephone pole. His face was shadowed. His clothes looked wrong for winter. Thin jacket, no gloves, hands in his pockets, and he wasn't walking toward the bus stop anymore. He was just standing there, watching me. I froze. My breath puffed in the cold air. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He didn't say anything. He just stared. I tried to convince myself that he lived nearby, that he was waiting for someone, that he just happened to be going the same direction. But then he stepped forward. One slow step, then another. Deliberate, silent. My heart started pounding. I whispered to myself, "Don't run, don't run. He'll know." I didn't know why I thought that. I just knew it felt true. I turned toward the bus stop and saw two older kids waiting there. I felt a wave of relief. Other people meant safety, or at least it felt like it when you're 10. I forced myself to walk calmly the rest of the way. The man didn't walk fast, he just followed. Far enough to pretend it was coincidence. Close enough that I knew it wasn't. When I reached the bus stop, one of the older kids looked at me and said, "You okay? You look freaked out." I replied quietly, "That man's been following me." He frowned and said, "What man?" I pointed across the street, but the man wasn't there anymore. The sidewalk was empty. The telephone pole stood alone, nothing but the wind moving the leaves. The older kid shrugged and said, "Probably just someone going to work." I nodded even though my chest still felt tight. The bus arrived a minute later. The doors opened with a hiss. I climbed on, glanced back one more time, and the man was standing across the street again. Still, half hidden behind a tree this time, watching me board the bus. For the entire ride, I stared out the window, trying to convince myself that maybe I imagined it. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe nothing was wrong. But deep down, I knew something was off. The next morning, I didn't want to go to the bus stop alone. I asked my mom, "Can you walk with me?" She looked confused and asked, "Why? What's wrong?" I didn't want to sound scared, so I said, "I just don't want to go alone today." She agreed and walked with me. The man wasn't there. But the morning after that, when I walked alone again, he returned. I saw him at the end of the street, standing in the same place, hands in his pockets, watching me walk. I didn't turn my head this time, but I felt his eyes the entire way, like cold fingers pressing between my shoulder blades. When I reached the bus stop, I whispered to the older kids again, "He's back." They followed my gaze, but once again, the man disappeared before they could see him. This happened 3 more times, always when I was alone, always keeping distance, always watching. One morning, after a particularly long night of anxiety, I finally told my mom the full story. I said, "There's a man that follows me to the bus stop. He hides when people look." My mom's face changed instantly. She knelt down, put her hands on my shoulders, and said, "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I didn't have an answer. I just felt embarrassed, confused. 10-year-old fear is hard to explain. She drove me to school that day, and the next, and the next. Eventually, winter turned to spring. The mornings got brighter. The cold lifted, and the man stopped showing up. We never saw him again, never got an explanation, never figured out who he was or what he wanted. All I know is that he followed me, 3 steps behind, for nearly a week, always silent, always watching, every now and then. When I think back on it as an adult, I wonder how close he actually was. What he would have done if I hadn't reached the bus stop in time. What might have happened if no one else had been there. What his plan was, or if he was waiting for a morning when I never showed up at all. Still one of the spookiest things to ever happen to me. Most childhood fears come from imagination. Monsters under the bed, faces in the dark, or maybe even shadows that move when you're trying to fall asleep. But every so often, a fear doesn't come from imagination at all. It comes from something real, something you saw, something you felt, something that didn't make sense then, and still doesn't make sense years later. I learned that on a cold morning when I was 12 years old, walking to the bus stop like I did every weekday. Nothing unusual, nothing special. Just that early morning quiet that only exists before most people are awake. But that was the morning I realized how quickly normal can fall apart, and how terrifying it is when someone you don't know decides to follow you. It happened like this. I left the house with my backpack on, stepped into the chilled air, and started down the sidewalk toward the corner. The sky was still dark, tinted faint blue, and the world felt empty in that way early mornings do. It was just me, my footsteps, and the long walk to the bus stop. Halfway down the street, I noticed something strange. Someone was standing at the next corner. Not moving, not walking, just standing. A tall figure in a dark coat with the hood pulled up. Too far to see a face, too still to feel normal. I kept walking, expecting them to start moving or turn around. But they didn't. As I got closer, my footsteps echoing softly on the pavement, I whispered to myself, maybe they're waiting for someone. That's what I wanted to believe. When I turned onto the next street, where the bus stop was located, something made me glance back. The figure had turned the corner too, still far away, still walking slowly, but definitely following the same path I took. I tried to shake it off. I told myself, it's a coincidence, nothing weird. But my pace picked up anyway. When I reached the bus stop, 2 other kids were already there. One of them, Mason, looked at me and said, "Why are you breathing so hard?" I replied quietly, "Someone's behind me. I don't know who." Mason frowned, peeked around me and said, "It's probably nothing." I didn't argue, but something deep in my stomach knew it wasn't nothing. The figure reached the end of the street and stopped again. Just stood there, watching us, hands in their pockets, hood still pulled low. Mason yelled out, "Hey, you need something?" But the person didn't react at all, didn't flinch, didn't move. The The other kid whispered, "That's creepy, dude." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. A minute later, headlights appeared down the road, the school bus. Relief washed over me instantly. The bus pulled up, the doors creaked open, and we all got on. I sat by the window and looked out, expecting the person to leave now that we were gone. But they didn't leave. They stepped out from the sidewalk and stood closer, watching the bus drive off. Their hoods shifted slightly as if they were following me with their eyes. All day at school, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Who they were, why they stopped when I stopped, why they didn't respond to Mason, why they didn't move until the bus arrived. The next morning, dread crawled up my throat before I even left the house. I peeked through the blinds. The corner where the figure stood yesterday was empty. I tried to convince myself it was over. I stepped outside and started walking. The street was quiet. Cars parked, leaves blowing across the pavement. No tall figure, no hooded coat. But when I reached the same halfway point as the day before, I froze. The figure was standing behind a tree at the far end of the street, not walking this time. Just leaning slightly to the side, like they wanted to remain hidden, but still watch me. My throat tightened. I whispered, "Why me? What do you want?" The figure didn't move. I sped up. My footsteps quickened. My breath puffed out in shaky clouds. I turned the corner toward the bus stop and stopped dead in my tracks. The figure had cut across the opposite block and was now standing across from the bus stop, waiting, watching, closer than before. I joined the other kids, trying to act normal. Mason looked at my face and said, "He's back, isn't he?" I replied quietly, "Yeah, and he's closer." Mason glanced across the street. The figure didn't hide this time, didn't step away, didn't pretend to ignore us. They just stared. The bus arrived again. We climbed on. I sat by the window, heart pounding. As the bus pulled away, I locked eyes with the hooded figure for a moment. And that's when something new happened. The figure reached up with one hand and slowly pointed at me, just one finger, extended, direct, unmistakable. I jerked back from the window. My stomach dropped. The bus engine growled as we drove away, but I couldn't shake the image of that gloved finger pointing right at me. That night, I told my mom everything. How the figure followed me, how he waited, how he hid, how he pointed. I expected her to brush it off, but her face went pale. She told me, "Tomorrow, I'm walking you to school." Not the bus stop, school, all the way. And she did. The figure never showed up. After a week of walking to school with my mom, I started riding the bus again. Months passed. Seasons changed. I never saw him again, not even once. But the part that sticks with me isn't the following. It isn't the silence. It isn't even the pointing. It's that he knew my route. He knew where I lived. He knew where I waited. He knew when I'd arrive. And he only appeared when I was alone. Still one of the spookiest things to ever happen to me. Some moments in life feel strange while they're happening, but you don't realize how dangerous they were until years later. You replay them in your mind and think, "I should have run sooner." Or I shouldn't have ignored that feeling. This is one of those moments, and even now, as an adult, I still don't like thinking about it. I was 11 years old, walking home from school on a warm afternoon sometime in the early 2000s. Back then, nobody had a smartphone. Kids carried Walkmans or CD players clipped to their pockets, earbuds barely hanging on. I had my silver portable CD player with a scratched Linkin Park disc inside, the anti-skip technology never actually working. It bounced against my hip as I walked, skipping every few steps. Life felt simple then, or at least it seemed that way. School had just let out. Kids were chasing each other in the parking lot, trading Yu-Gi-Oh cards, showing off Heelys. Nobody paid much attention to anything except who was getting picked up first and who was walking home alone. My route took me past a long, quiet stretch of road. No houses for half a mile. Just an open field on one side and tall trees on the other. Parents always warned us, stay on the sidewalk, don't cut through the trees. So I didn't. I just kept walking, one earbud barely working, the CD glitching with every bump. About halfway down the road, I noticed a slow-moving van behind me. White, old, like the kind you'd see delivering bulk ice cream to gas stations in the 90s. Rust around the wheel wells. Faded cartoon sticker on the back door that looked like it used to be a popsicle. At first, I didn't think much of it. Delivery drivers use that road sometimes. But the van didn't pass me. It just crawled behind me. Too slow to be normal. Too steady to be an accident. I stopped kicking the rock I'd been playing with. My pace quickened. My CD player thumped against my sides, skipping until the music completely froze. The van pulled up beside me. The passenger window rolled down with a grinding sound, and a clown leaned out. Not a birthday party clown, not the cute kind from commercials. This one looked like a worn-out carnival reject. White face paint cracking, red nose chipped, blue diamond eyes smudged, yellow wig slightly melted from heat. The costume had that thrift store musk to it. He smiled and said, "Hey there, buddy, need a ride home?" My stomach twisted instantly. I replied, "No, I'm okay. I live right there." I pointed toward a random house way down the road that wasn't mine at all. The clown chuckled and said, "That's funny, because I've been watching, and I didn't see you walk out of any of these houses." My throat closed. Something about the way he said, "been watching," made my skin crawl. I kept walking without answering. The van rolled forward to stay next to me. The clown leaned further out. "Come on, I've got toys in the back. You like toys, action figures? I've got Beyblades. I've got Game Boys. You can pick whatever you want." Hearing him say Game Boys made it worse. It wasn't the way a normal adult would say it. He said it too eagerly, too rehearsed, like he'd been practicing the words. I forced out, "Leave me alone." He tapped something metal against the door. I glanced over. A small hammer rested in his hand, tapping slowly, rhythmically, like he was thinking through his next step. "You know," he said quietly, "kids go missing out here all the time. No one hears them over the traffic." There was no traffic? Not on that road. Not at that time of day. I sped up, almost jogging, my backpack bouncing, my CD player skipping like crazy. The van jerked forward to stay beside me. The clown's voice hardened. "Get in the van." I shook my head violently. "No." The van swerved ahead of me and blocked the sidewalk. The side doors slid open with a violent slam. Inside were ropes, blankets, a stained mattress, plastic storage bins, old VHS tapes stacked high. Everything looked wrong. Everything looked used. I didn't think. I ran. I sprinted back toward the school, lungs burning, legs shaking. The van skidded as it did a sloppy U-turn. The engine roared behind me. I heard the clown shouting something, but my pulse was too loud to make out the words. I ran until the school fence came into view. I screamed, "Help!" My voice cracked. A group of 8th graders looked over. 2 teachers on parking lot duty turned toward me instantly. The van screeched to a stop at the intersection. The clown slammed the door. The tires spun, gravel flew. The van disappeared down the road like it had never been there. I collapsed onto the sidewalk, shaking so badly my backpack straps slid off my shoulders. A teacher rushed over. "What happened? What's wrong?" I gasped out. "A clown, in a van. He tried to get me inside." The police were called. They searched the area for hours. They checked abandoned lots. They drove past every construction site and side street. But they never found the van. Not even tracks. Not a single witness who saw it. Nothing. The next week, The school sent a letter home warning parents about a man dressed as a clown attempting to lure kids. But after that letter, there were no other reports. No sightings, no calls. It was like he vanished. Years later, I still think about the things inside the van. The toys, the VHS tapes, the rope. The way he said Game Boys, like it mattered to him. And every now and then, when I see an old carnival wig at a thrift store or hear the hiss of a sliding van door, I feel that same cold shock hit my chest. I really don't like the word traumatized. But I was definitely traumatized this day. If you're going to be walking alone, make sure someone is expecting you. Whether it be expecting you to come back home or expecting you to arrive wherever you're going. Just make sure someone knows you're walking alone. Be safe, everyone.